Okay, well, let me go ahead and do a brief introduction. And so first of all, to welcome everyone here. These are the Thursday afternoon speaker series of the Division of Social and Transcultural Psychiatry here at McGill. And we have several speaker series that run under the broad rubric of the division, one of which is Culture, Mind, and Brain. This series today partly falls under that rubric. We also have a speaker series on global mental health and one on culture and community mental health, and also the politics of psychic life, which is sort of a collaboration with the Department of Anthropology. So a variety of different rubrics that we have these talks under. Sometimes we cross-list them. It's really more of a kind of labeling to alert people to what might be of interest to them. And I'm very excited today to be introducing our speaker, Professor Marga Vicedo, who is going to present some work related to her recently published book. She is a professor in the Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science and Technology at the University of Toronto. And she has a background in philosophy and in history of science. She's worked in the history and philosophy of biology in the past, but in recent years has moved to work on attachment, and now on this really pivotal moment in the recent history of our understanding of autism and related disorders. In 2013, she published The Nature and Nurture of Love from Imprinting to Attachment in Cold War America with the University of Chicago. I think we've sent around already on the poster more of this biographical note, which has some of the papers and so on that you can learn about. Looking forward very much to your talk, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, for inviting me and for coming here today. And I look forward to our discussion too. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, my title, as you know, today is Clara Park's Call for Valuing a Mother's Knowledge in Understanding Autism and actually mental conditions in general. So, and as you said, it's based, or it comes from a book that I recently published called Intelligent Love. You'll understand soon enough why. And it's the story of Clara Park and her autistic daughter. And it focuses a lot, not exclusively, on the myth of the refrigerator mother. It's actually a hybrid history of science and told through the story of Clara and her daughter. I mean, done so consciously because I wanted to show that the history of scientific ideas has a real impact on people. And at the same time that people are not just recipients or even victims, but that people have an active role in also shaping those ideas. So it was challenging. I never done anything like that, but if you look at the book, I mean, it sort of weaves the history of autism and ideas about the condition with the story of this family. So let me start. At 12 years of age, a girl invented the following system. Sun with clear sky, 4 doors. Sun with 1 cloud, 3 doors. Sun with 2 clouds, 2 doors. Sun with 3 clouds, 1 door. Sun with 4 clouds, 0 doors. The girl classifies days into 29 different kinds, depending on the presence of clouds and the position of the sun in the sky. She names each day. Day high in summer is the day with high sun and no clouds. In winter, day nothing refers to a clear sky. The state of the sky also has affective consequences. The sun brings happiness to her, while any cloud will ruin her mood. When she gets up, the girl rushes to her bedroom's window to look at the sky. Terrifying surprises are always possible. A day could be what she calls a day high dark cloud. Despondency, sadness, and despair will follow. Over the years, the girl establishes diverse relationships within her system. The different types of days correlate with numbers, flavors, colors, and gum wrappers. Number 3, for example, is rainbow colored. Because of its effective connotations, the system also helps to organize and evaluate other experiences in her life. She assigns 4 doors and no clouds to hard rock music because it brings her such intense pleasure that she needs to put 4 doors in between her and the sound to make it bearable. For her evening meal, she measures the green juice she pours in her favorite green cup. The amount of juice she'll drink will depend on the clouds in the sky that day. The idiosyncratic character of this system reveals the unique mind of its creator, Jessica Park. Around this time, Jessica's universe is filled with numbers. This is how she represented herself. That's Jessica, that's her own drawing. So she's pretty much a stick in front of a blackboard full of numbers. She wrote pages and pages filled with numbers. And sometimes, like in one occasion, it took a family's friend, world-leading mathematician and theoretical physicist Freeman Dyson, to figure out the relation between the numbers in one of her pages, that one specifically. Jessica's mother, Clara Park, realized that her youngest daughter was different from her siblings when Jessica was almost 3 years old. Jessica did not engage with other children and did not reach for any objects. She seemed content just sitting on the floor by herself. Clara wondered, was this just Jessica's personality, perhaps even the mark of her uniqueness? Or were these signs of some developmental issue? And what could the mother do about it? Today, I want to tell you what Clara Park did and why it mattered. So that's the outline. I will tell you about Clara Park as a mother and her book, The Siege, and then a little bit only about Clara Park as an activist, and I'll conclude with some remarks. So first of all, who was Clara Park? Born in 1923, Clara Park grew up between Virginia and New York, between a racist and upper-class world she despised and the progressive and intellectual milieu of her New York City friends. In her own writings, she presented herself as a typical middle-class woman of her time. Educated at Radcliffe College, the all-female counterpart to Harvard University at the time, she had followed social expectations in choosing motherhood over a career, as had done most of her classmates. For example, Kate Russell Tate, daughter of renowned philosopher Bertrand Russell, was one of Park's class 2 summa cum laudes, and she devoted herself to raising 6 children. In the late 1950s, Clara Park felt happy with her family. Following her husband David, a professor of physics at Williams College, they had settled in peaceful Williamstown, where Clara had raised 3 children. But Clara was also ready to devote some energy to her own intellectual development by writing and teaching literature, her longtime passion. She put those plans on hold when Jessica was diagnosed as autistic in 1961 at 3 years of age. There's Clara Park with her 4 children. The youngest is Jessica. Though at the time parents of disabled children were advised to leave them in an institution, the Parks decided to raise Jessica at home. Clara decided to work with her daughter as a good scientist would do. She observed her systematically, took copious notes, tried different experiments with toys and games, kept records of her progress and her failures. When she brought Jessica to the experts in children's minds, the psychiatrists or child psychiatrists, psychologists, and psychoanalysts, she expected kindness and also some recognition for her efforts. She got neither. By presenting data about her daughter and by trying to analyze her condition systematically, Clara Park only proved that she was what was called at the time an intellectual mother. For the experts, this meant a mother unable to love her child naturally, a mother who followed her intellect rather than her maternal instincts. That is precisely the kind of mother whom researchers at the time accused of driving their infants into autism. That's Clara Park with Jessie or Jessica. So at the Johns Hopkins University child psychiatrist Leo Kanner had identified autism as a unique syndrome in 1943. He first said children were born with it. But in the following decade, Kanner was greatly influenced by studies that postulated that lack of maternal love caused all sorts of psychopathologies in children. I refer here to the work of René Spitz, John Bowlby, and other psychiatrists and psychoanalysts. And there is a picture of René Spitz and here of Bowlby. So elsewhere, as it has been mentioned, I think here's the cover of my book, I have written about how these researchers extrapolated from animal studies to justify their views about maternal love or the determinant character of maternal love in a child's emotional and psychological development, despite the serious criticisms that this move received from biologists and from anthropologists mainly. And I have also written about how attachment theory is based on a limited sample, what today we call the weird sample, despite its claims about universality. That is in itself another story, but what is still unappreciated is how much these views also influence several people working on autism. And swayed by these views, about the decade after he identified infantile autism as an independent condition, Kanner said that parents of autistic children left them in refrigerators that did not defrost. Wait. From here comes the metaphor, I'm sure you've heard it a million times, of the refrigerator mother, and the view that cold intellectual mothers caused autism in children, as well as other conditions. In his best-selling book, 1967 book, The Empty Fortress, Infantile Autism and the Birth of the Self, there you have a picture, Bruno Bettelheim also blamed mothers for their children's autism. In fact, Bettelheim is often presented as the originator of the refrigerator mother metaphor, though he never used it. Clara was blamed for Jessica's condition first at the Putnam Center in Boston, a leading center for child psychoanalysis in the US, and later at the Hampstead Clinic, founded by Anna Freud in London. The Parks took Jessica there when they went to spend a sabbatical year in Cambridge. The Hampstead clinical team saw Parks' efforts to document Jessica's development as proof that she approached her child, quote, as a project. Sliding into a depression, Park found encouragement after reading Bernard Rimland's 1964 book, Infantile Autism. Now, Rimland criticized the psychoanalytic accounts that blame mothers and defended the organic origin of autism. After publishing this book, which is interesting to note, Rimland published as a scientist. He was a psychologist who worked on something completely different for the army, but decided to work on his own on autism because he had, his oldest son had this condition. It is interesting for the purposes of our discussion here that Rimland does not once mention in his book that he was the father of an autistic child, because of course his scientific credibility rested on his credentials as a psychologist. When he published this book, the first letter he received, literally days after publication, was from Clara Park. In a 5 pages letter, she praised his contribution. Yet she told him she disagreed with his belief that autism was mainly a cognitive condition. For her, the affective aspects of autism were primary. She came to that conclusion by reflecting on Jessica's language. Clara had noticed that Jessica could easily learn difficult words such as dodecagon and trapezoid after hearing them only once. However, she had difficulties learning concepts related to emotions, moods, and feelings, and she showed no inclination for social contact. After corresponding with Rimland, Park decided to write about her experiences in raising Jessica. Her book, The Siege, the most detailed record of raising an autistic child to date, and perhaps to this date, appeared in 1967. That's The Siege, the first edition. Clara's book provided a detailed record of Jessica's development and an examination of the available evidence for different views about autism. It is a hybrid book, a memoir and an analytic essay. It is a work of intelligence and love. More, it is a defense of intelligent love for motherhood and for science. Park disallowed that her daughter was autistic because she did not love her. And in doing so, she challenged the authority of the experts in children's minds at the time. Rejecting the separation of thinking and feeling, Park aimed to show that objectivity and reason are not incompatible with love and can be a valuable part of mothering. Further, that intelligent love could be also a way to reach reliable knowledge. Arguing that intelligence and love were not natural enemies, Park challenged prevalent notions of maternal love as well as of scientific epistemology. First, on maternal love. Park put her finger on the core, at least one core assumption of the literature blaming mothers. Child psychoanalysts from Erik Erikson to René Spitz, from Margaret Ribble to John Bowlby to Bruno Bettelheim, pretty much anyone at the time, claimed that what the child needed was natural love, some kind of raw feeling that should not be sullied by a mother's other interests or preoccupations. But none of them had explained why this type of love, assuming that there are different types of love, but that this particular type of natural love was better for a child, richer and more nurturing than other types of love, including intelligent love. Second, on science. Park argued that parents could contribute to advancing knowledge about autism because their love for their children was not an impediment to understanding their condition. But for many, an objective mother sounded like a contradiction in terms. Love is usually considered to be a deeply subjective and passionate emotion, while science was presumed to rest on objective and detached reasoning. This prevailing separation between subjective feelings and objective thinking can be seen in the response Park received from editors and reviewers who often questioned that she could be a good mother and objective at the same time. For example, one reviewer said, "The account is so successful," referring to the siege, "because Mrs. Park has the unusual capacity to stand aside and look at herself and her child and interpersonal relationships objectively and analytically." But he continued, "Tragically, it is perhaps this very quality which helped to produce a child of Ellie's type." Ellie is the name that Clara Park gave to her daughter Jessica, because in the first publications about Jessica, she changed the names of all the members of the family. So a mother could not be objective and still be a good mother. The response was not surprising, because Park was not only questioning widespread notions of good mothering, but also challenging a central tenet in scientific epistemology. Historians and philosophers have shown that objectivity is not a monolithic concept and has changed over time. However, as Lorraine Daston, Peter Gallison, and other historians have documented, objectivity in modern science came to be defined as absence of subjectivity. And what could be more subjective than a mother's feelings? As such, mothers were not seen as capable of contributing sound insights about their children's condition. But parents and even mothers were not always seen as incapable of providing accurate observations about their children. Quote, "Ask her to look out for number 5, that referred to a question, when one of her children is struggling and just going to burst out crying." End of quote. So wrote Charles Darwin in a letter in which he asked his friend and fellow scientist Thomas Henry Huxley to pass a note to his wife, Henrietta. The note included a questionnaire regarding children's facial expressions. Darwin wanted Henrietta's observations on her children for his own landmark research on the expression of the emotions. He asked many of his friends to collect data through their wives, as he trusted mothers to provide accurate observations needed for reliable knowledge. Darwin's 1877 paper, A Biographical Sketch of an Infant, considered one of the founding texts of child psychology, was also based on his own observations of his children and those provided by his friends' wives. Even at the turn of the 20th century, baby biographies, some of them written by mothers, were widely read and appreciated. But over the 20th century, male researchers who dominated the emerging professions of psychology and child development dismissed patience, sympathy, empathy, and other traits associated with maternal care as interfering with scientific discipline. In evaluating the quality of observations, the scientific credentials of the observer became increasingly important. In addition, the rise of experimentation in psychology helped to marginalize the merely observational approach and skills that had been so influential during the field's early years. Legitimizing child developmental science led to a rejection of maternalist traditions and to the adoption of a scientific stance, one that historians such as Mark Solovey have shown was favored by funding agencies in the United States. Consequently, child development studies join many other scientific fields by removing emotions and specifically maternal subjectivity from scientific inquiry. Park, however, believed that mothers had much to contribute. She disagreed with the view that her love for Jessica prevented her from understanding her condition. But what exactly could parents bring to the table? First, Park argued that parents could observe their children in a variety of situations, contrary to the experts who only interacted with them during a clinical or therapeutic visit. This gave parents a much bigger and varied set of data that went beyond, quote, the artificial situation of the therapy hour. But it was not a simple matter of quantity and variety. The daily contact with their children allowed parents to acquire, quote, deep knowledge of the child in context. This was an advantage that could come only from what Clara Park called intimate knowledge. Parents, she noted, have extensive familiarity with their child's development from birth, and they know their child's past and its relevance to the present better than any doctor or researcher. Even if a psychiatrist could make independent observations of the child in the present, sound scientific interpretation depended on accessing, quote, the details of the child's history to make sense of what one has found. Now, Park's point highlighted the difficulties of interpreting behavior. In the clinic or the laboratory, researchers and clinicians can observe specific behaviors. But what do those behaviors mean for each child? She argued that it is easier to understand the meaning of specific acts when one knows the child's history. And if understanding a child was akin to exploration, Park reasoned that only the parents could offer, quote, a map that shows the major landmarks, end of quote. So it is only in that context that one can interpret adequately what the specific actions mean for a child. In a word, the position of the mother should not be an impediment to knowledge making, but could even be an advantage. Furthermore, parents could add a dimension that they know better than others, what she called, quote, the feel of lived experience. For she claimed, it is the experience, I'm quoting here, it is the experience, not the mere fact of disability, that is what all our work and study, parental and professional, is about. In my book, I document several ways in which the parents contributed to a better understanding of autism. For reasons of time, I will only cover briefly a couple of examples. One way in which the parents' intimate knowledge contributed to a better understanding of autism concerned the conceptualization of the condition. I show that Clara's own experience and work with Jessica, her intelligent love, provided her with the ability to challenge another entrenched dichotomy about autism at the time. Initially, Park, like the majority of researchers into autism, thought about it as a condition of the affects, as I mentioned earlier. The metaphor of the autistic child as one who retreats from the world, a child immured in her own self, widely used at the time, also encouraged the idea of the divided self, a child with intelligence but no emotions. However, over time, Clara Park realized that the focus on the affects made it difficult to see the significance of other aspects in autistic children. In the revised edition of The Siege, published about a decade after the first and containing an update on Jessica's development, Park offered a remarkable analysis of the shortcomings this view posed for interpreting her daughter's development. So Park made another radical call to rethinking the reductionistic categories we use to look at mental conditions. About autism, she asked, quote, cognitive or affective impairment? And she answered, quote, it is not only unnecessary to choose between them, it is impossible. Thus, her knowledge of Jessica's history helped Clara Park to reject categories that were not useful for understanding a child's emotional and psychological development in general and autism in particular. Now, let me move to a second area in which intimate knowledge of a child became important. The therapeutics realm, and explain a little bit what I call Clara Park's sort of radical pragmatism. When Jessica was diagnosed as autistic, about 20 years after Kana had identified the syndrome, psychiatry and psychology still had little to offer to help children with this diagnosis. Psychoanalyst Bruno Bettelheim recommended, quote, parentectomy, or radical separation from the parents in order to treat autistic children in his famous residential school in Chicago. Many psychoanalytic centers offer psychotherapy for the children and their mothers. And I mean mothers, not the fathers. Kana advised sending the autistic child to a farm, a place where the combination of scheduled activities with low pressure created a restorative environment for the child, away from the rigid expectations of the refrigerator mothers. In some residential centers, autistic children were treated with amphetamines, LSD, or simply ignored and received no supports for their development. Parents who decided to raise their children at home were on their own. Adopting a deeply pragmatic approach, Park focused on what could help Jessica, picking and choosing from different approaches, regardless of their theoretical foundation. First, she did this with psychoanalysis. At the Hampstead Clinic, to Park's surprise, they prescribed therapy several times per week for her, not for Jessica, not for her husband or the family, for Clara. So Clara is, ready to help her daughter, started working with psychoanalyst Marie Battle-Singer. The only psychoanalyst in Cambridge at the time, Singer knew a thing or two about prejudice too. Originally from Mississippi, she trained first as a social worker and left the United States in search of work opportunities. In London, she got a PhD in psychology, in addition to her training in child analysis under Anna Freud. Initially, Singer tried to psychoanalyze Clara, who did not see why they had to focus on her while her child needed support. Luckily, Singer was also a pragmatist like Clara. Recognizing the importance of practice of a theory, Singer shifted the focus to Jessica. As they worked together over the months in Cambridge, Singer encouraged Clara to share with her the materials she was using with Jessica. For example, on April of 1963, Clara sent her some drawings she was employing to help Jessica visualize some situations and respond to them appropriately. Since Jessica was afraid of taking a bath, Clara had made some basic paper cutouts of a bathtub and Jessica inside. You can take the figure out and put it inside again. She used them in their play together. She made other paper drawings representing her, Jessie, and her rocking chair while they sat in Williamstown. They were separate figures that Clara used together with others to represent different situations. Thus, disregarding much of the psychoanalytical theory that she found faulty and ignoring that psychoanalysts blamed her for her daughter's autism, Park focused on those practices that were useful to Jessica and developed techniques that anticipated current methods used to help autistic children visualize how to behave in situations they find stressful. Park also took this pragmatic stance towards the approach that became widely used with autistic children in the mid-1960s and later, behavioral conditioning. As you know, famous Harvard psychoanalyst, not psychoanalyst, famous Harvard psychologist B.F. Skinner had argued that most behaviors could be learned through operant conditioning, that is, by reinforcing desired behaviors with rewards and discouraging undesirable ones with punishments. And at UCLA, psychologist Ivar Lovaas promoted this approach with autistic children. His operant conditioning-based behavioral therapy, later called applied behavior analysis or ABA, first focused on teaching language to autistic children in a laboratory setting, using things such as sweets or small sips of juice as rewards. But Lovaas also used aversive tools, punishment or unpleasant stimuli, in order to eliminate children's self-inflicted harms or aggression towards others. Aversive stimuli included slaps on the thigh, shouting, and in some cases, low-level electric shock. When his work was showcased in a 1965 Life magazine piece, his use of the shock room led to growing concern among many parents. Here are some of the pictures. That's Lovaas with one of the children, and that's a picture where the child is being shocked. I mean, she's standing on a grid, which is metal, and when she doesn't pay attention, she gets, a low dosage of electricity in that metal grid under her feet. Park was aware of the controversies about ABA, but she was also determined to use what could help Jessica. Although autistic advocates have criticized ABA because it denies the agency of autistic people and forces them into a standard model of normality, the Park family found a way of using it that transformed ABA into a truly collaborative effort with Jessica. So when Jessica was an adolescent, she met actually a boy who was using a golf counter to give himself points for doing the right things or the things that his parents wanted him to do. And she fell in love with this little gadget. So what they did is use it in a way that it was sort of a homemade behavioral program. But the real novelty was that Jessica and Clara wrote a weekly contract and decided which specific words and actions were to be rewarded, such as saying please or answering when spoken to. Together, Clara and Jessica decided how many points Jessica would get for each desirable behavior. And they also agreed together on the rewards. For example, at the beginning, if Jessica reached 100 points by the end of the day, she would get a popsicle. Jessica kept track of the points herself, and her mother administered the rewards. Later, they also introduced penalties, which were mainly deducting points for actions that they both concurred were not nice. Jessica enjoyed setting goals for herself and loved the contracts. At first, they contained only a few items, but she kept making them longer. Over time, it became clear that Jessica did not even care about the specific rewards. The points themselves had become rewards for Jessica. So, though inspired by Skinner's ideas, the program the Park family had developed departed significantly from the standard view of ABA as an intensive program of behavior modification imposed by an external authority. So in a collaborative way, they designed the contract and modified the program in light of their experiences. Jessica set her goals, chose her rewards, and agreed to the penalties. Their program did not try to eliminate autistic behaviors such as rocking or flapping, but focused on behaviors that Jessica said she wanted to change because they made her feel anxious or interfered with other things she wanted to do. Because the program was designed to use elements she liked, specific goals, fixed rules, counting, she loved numbers, precise rewards, transparency. Jessica expressed that she wanted to participate and provided input in its development. In some occasions, her brother and friends also designed contracts to reach their goals, such as exercising more or stop saying bad words. So together, Jessica, her family, and her friends used behavioral principles in a way that gave her agency and control over the goals and methods of her learning. In this way, they rejected the restrictive and problematic aspects of ABA therapies and challenged the limitations imposed on autistic people at the time. So reading about the therapy or a teaching program in the textbooks or the academic articles, we often encounter a one model fits all scheme. Yet in real life, parents were changing and adapting activities and programs to suit their own children. Those adaptations carried out in the domestic space by individual families are rarely documented and published. But we cannot undervalue how common and significant they have been in the history of autism and probably even psychiatry more generally. Clara Park wrote about her ways to help Jessica in the revised edition of The Siege. And over the years, her book became essential reading for parents of autistic children who have continued to rediscover the book. It was translated into German, Spanish, Japanese, French, and other languages. Using her writings, Clara Park turned herself into an activist in order to reclaim the experience of parents as valuable expertise and to fight for services for autistic people. So let me say a few words about her as an activist, although I'm going to check how I'm doing with time.
You're fine. You have another 10 or 15 minutes if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. So parents were instrumental in the US in the fight to obtain education, healthcare, social acceptance, and disability rights, as well as in shaping directions for research and services. Clara Park was an important actor in those fights. She was a key player in the early years of the National Society for Autistic Children, a member of its board of directors, and the editor of the newsletter for several years, 1968 to 1972. At the first National Congress held in Washington, D.C. in July of 1969, the aim was to foster the interaction of parents and professionals, quote, on an equal footing, with the parents acting as coordinators and the professionals as resources. So Clara Park, together with other mothers such as Margaret Dewey and Ruth Sullivan, here she is giving a talk, but I wanted to show this picture because Ruth Sullivan, who Clara Park is to my left, and Ruth Sullivan, the one with glasses, Ruth Sullivan died very recently. And so these mothers maintain an extensive correspondence, discussing new developments in the field, always testing them against their own lived experience. And there are things that are little known, but surprising and amazing. For example, well before Asperger's syndrome was introduced in the scientific literature in the 1980s, these mothers had already read about Asperger's work and had questioned the widespread view that Asperger's and Kanner syndrome were different conditions. And the way they did this is because they know not only their own children, but each other's children. These mothers corresponded extensively, went to many conferences. When they went to the conference, they brought their children. So Ruth Sullivan, who had several children, they were all there. They saw each other's children develop. They saw which child, where they started, how they were doing, and they were the first to identify that autism was a spectrum because they are the ones who saw the children developing differently. These parents also lobbied for support and education for autistic children. And as their children grew, and very importantly, they invited them to become participants in conference and offer their own insights about their personal experiences. Although today, sometimes parents are pitted against autistic advocates, the first people who invited and who centered the voices of autistic people were the parents who invited them once they grew up to speak in their conference and to write in the newsletter. So to fully understand and to share her own perspective, Clara also traveled to other countries, including Spain and India, and met with autistic advocates there. So in my view, Park was calling for a new type of knowledge, one that did not rely only on experimental work or observations in the laboratory and clinics. And I want to emphasize this because sometimes she has been presented as someone who rejected the scientific establishment. I don't think that's correct. I mean, she valued the scientific method, she valued objectivity. She thought that that could be complemented. In this new type of knowledge would be one that valued lived experience, multiple perspectives, and narrative accounts such as memoirs written by parents and autistic people, and one that appreciated the significance of historical development for understanding an individual's psychological and emotional makeup, as well as the importance of history for illuminating our views about mental conditions. Although she did not call it that, she was in a sense arguing that one needed to take an ethnographic approach to understand autistic people whose actions have meanings that are not visible in institutional settings. By providing an account of autistic children in the real environments, the house, the school, the playground, mothers like herself could add to the multiple perspectives needed to understand the children's perceptions of the world. The parents could provide narratives that complemented the knowledge reached through scientific means. There is Clara and Jessica. So some concluding remarks. I hope this brief account of Clara Park's work has shown why a mother's intelligent love mattered. Park helped change what parents could be and do, and help change what autistic children could be and do. Changing not only the available options, but also, and just as important, changing their sense of what was possible for them. In fighting to have a mother's voice recognized as a legitimate source of expertise, Clara Park challenged a deeply entrenched dichotomy between emotion and cognition that has been, and in my view, continues to be, pervasive in views about mothering, scientific knowledge, and children's development. In doing that, Clara Park and other parents called for society to value different ways of loving, knowing, and being. Mothers can love and know. Scientists can know and feel. Science and mothering can be both objective and subjective, while recognizing the multifaceted meanings of both terms and the complexity of their interrelations. Furthermore, in understanding mental development, the cognitive and the emotional are deeply interrelated. That much a mother could say. Clara Park's story was extraordinary but not unique. Several sociological and ethnographic studies have reported that mothers in many places, from the US to Morocco, also adapted therapies in pragmatic ways that help their disabled children. Like Clara Park, these mothers translated scientific ideas into specific tools to care for their children. In doing so, they made valuable contributions to the understanding and to the acceptance of autism. I leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just remarkable story and very important work in laying this out. And as some of the people have commented in the chat already, it's very pertinent to the present moment as well, because some of these same issues persist or crop up in other areas. And there's a whole discussion around epistemic justice these days in terms of who has a voice to make knowledge claims. And it's a perennial problem in clinical care where we're trying to, figure out what's going on with people and sometimes have frameworks that discount their own version of things for better or for worse in terms of what the basis of that is. I think that, the work that you've done is, tremendous service to all these discussions and very parallel to, we could have been talking today about people who hear voices or many other areas that are right now hotly contested and people are struggling to make sense of how to respond in a way that is helpful. And I think this is just a deeply instructive story. And I thank you very much for bringing it here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.